Power of Babble, the podcast where nothing's off the table. From Bible mysteries and strange phenomena to the questions that keep you up at night, we explore it all with curiosity and faith. I'm your host, Courtney, joined by my co-hosts, Caleb and Jeremy. Together, we dive into the weird, the wonderful, and the wildly curious. So grab your coffee, open your mind, and let's babble. Hello, Babbleites, and welcome back to the Power of Babble. We're so excited for you to join us again, and we have a special guest for you today. Special guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Garrett Goff.
Garrett Goff. All right.
Hi,
And
Garrett.
what are we going to be talking about? Our special guest always choose the topic.
Our first guest in this new format.
That's right.
The
That's
first
true,
guest of the
yeah.
You're the
summer.
first video guest.
That's
Yeah.
very true. How does that make you
Congratulations.
feel?
Very pressured. So,
As you should. As you should. Okay, so guest choose the topic. What are we talking about today?
cosmology, space,
Yeah.
getting into things, the universe.
Yeah.
The universe.
So
Small
Wow.
small topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's pretty fitting because I feel like just in I don't know, the world right now, space and I don't know, the cosmos are a
Yeah.
big topic. So I guess really what we're going to be talking about today is, did we land on the moon?
That's
And
not,
did Artemis 2 actually go
No.
to the moon?
This is
again?
not up
That's
for
what we're talking
debate.
about, right?
Different episode.
No.
Yeah. The
Different
answer is
episode.
yes and kind of.
I was kind of
but
hoping
moving
that's where we
on.
were going.
It's not really up for debate. I mean, we just did land on the moon.
I don't know.
But
It's okay.
okay, but this is in the zeitgeist, right? This is space, right? And right now with Artemis 2, also Project Hail Mary, the movie, right?
Big
And
hit.
this stuff like this happens at least every couple of years. That space kind of, captures everybody's attention in some way, shape, or form. And it
Yeah.
has consistently for decades, right? Ever since at least, the announcement of the space race in the 60s. But arguably before that, right? Because you had pulp stuff about visiting other worlds and, things like that. So, I mean, it bears mentioning space is something that even though the vast majority of humanity has never been there, is something that interests us very deeply. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Or has anybody been there? I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Or- Here's the thing. Normally, I would tolerate these sorts of jokes, but we have some viewers and listeners who will take that seriously.
Oh, no.
Very
And-
strong.
Yeah.
I know,
It's sad.
it's fine. So, okay, well, I have a question for you. What made you pick this topic? Are you like super interested in it or?
Space is cool.
Okay,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
growing up,
Arguably.
that was always something that just was really interesting to me.
So
Yeah.
Going to school for the longest time, that's what I was going to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a associate's degree in physics because that's where I was going to go into it, like an astronomy field,
Okay.
till I
Yeah.
got led a different way. But it still
So are you,
interests me very much.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask kind of an invasive question. Were you a Star Trek guy, a Star Wars guy, or none of the above?
None of them.
Oh, that hurts me.
Trekkies.
Wow.
I don't.
To the nerds, that's
Yes,
offensive.
I know.
This
Yeah.
is I like this setup because this is the cool couch. That is definitely the nerd couch. I'm on one today, y'all, and I'm feeling it.
At what
How do you
point?
feel?
At what point do I pull the plug on this just because of her insults?
I mean, normally I would say that's completely uncalled for, but we might have to do it this episode.
Yeah, I just feel like, I don't know. I feel backed up today. I appreciate Garrett being here.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Back to the
I forget
matter
where we were
at
going with it. I'm so sorry.
back
So-
to the matter at hand.
Back to cosmology. Back to cosmology. So
Yeah.
so I guess maybe we should talk about first like what do we even mean by cosmology? Right? Are we talking about like Russian astronauts, cosmonauts?
Yeah,
That is
cosmonauts.
where that term comes from, but
Yeah.
that's not what we mean when we refer to cosmology. So
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean, it really comes from even the Russian version comes from the Greek original is cosmos or cosmos
Mhm.
is the more common version of the term, and it literally just means the universe. All that is. Typically, when people say the universe, what they really mean is time, space, and matter,
Mhm.
which is really everything in existence that we're aware of. It's interesting because you were talking about how, like in popular culture, sometimes we get our cumulative attention gets sort of captured by questions about space, questions about the cosmos, which it hasn't always been the case in the way that it is so pronounced these days. Because, at one time, not that long ago, we were an entirely terrestrial species, and so the only kind of questions that people asked about the cosmos were the kinds when they looked up at the stars,
Right.
and wondered about, what's out there. And now, I think we're in a pretty unique position historically, like in terms of the history of humanity, in the sense that we have a very keen awareness of the vastness of the universe in a way that most of humanity has not.
It's true.
Which I think is something that kind of it kind of invites awe and wonder. I think that's maybe why we get so enraptured by the topic.
I forget who, but I think there has been one kind of like historian of ideas or science who said that one of the ways to kind of measure the development of human civilization is by the maximum scale at which they think or can conceive of or posit. And if you look at different estimates of like the size of the universe, there has been a massive increase in what we in our understanding of the size of the universe in recent centuries, and even like the last couple of centuries.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard estimates about, if you take all of the grains of sand on all of the beaches on planet Earth, and you calculate the number, there are orders of magnitude more stars
that's
in
crazy.
the universe, by orders of magnitude. And when you think about the scale of a star, I mean, our sun is not the biggest star by any stretch, and yet it dwarfs the size of the Earth. And there are countless, I mean, really innumerable. It makes me think of the scripture when God says to Abraham, right, walk out from your tent and look at the stars and say, can you number them? And it's a rhetorical question, because the answer is no, you can't. And I think that scale is really kind of mesmerizing. Yeah.
Well, I think that's why, I mean, for how much that we've already discovered, there's so much more that we don't even know about.
Yeah.
And I think that's what brings like so much
Curiosity.
Curiosity is a good word
Yeah.
about it. This might be jumping the gun a little bit too early, but I just lost my train of thought completely. I had a question.
It probably was jumping the gun. That's why.
May be so. Yeah, it was. I don't even remember.
Yeah. There are some questions that sort of pop up in my mind. This might be jumping the gun as well.
Okay, well, you ask yours and maybe it'll pique
jar something loose. Yeah. One of the questions that's sort of a fundamental question. Leibniz made this question famous.
Who is that?
Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz.
Okay.
Was a mathematician and philosopher.
Yeah.
Because he was showing off that he could do it all.
Extremely influential in the development of calculus, if I recall.
Yes,
correctly.
he was. Yeah, I think he and Newton both sort of developed calculus simultaneously. It's one of those kind of like Tesla Edison sort
Love
of things.
me some calculus.
Yeah.
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 Well, it's really useful. I mean, and if you've struggled,
of course he would be the guy who takes that seriously. He's like, yeah, it is. It's great.
No, if you and just to put that in perspective, it's like, oh yeah, calculus. I learned that in high school, and it's like, well, just remember how tough it was to learn calculus.
Imagine
and then
inventing it.
imagine
I
inventing.
didn't learn calculus.
So,
Anyways.
there you go.
Yeah, well, I think we could all go our whole lives without calculus, but
no, we could not.
We really couldn't, because it is super useful, and the idea that people came up with it, it raises another question, which is that why is it that people can make all these mathematical systems, and then they just discover that they apply to the physical world?
Yeah.
That's a question, that the unreasonable applicability of mathematics that's another podcast. But
it goes to show, when we talk about cosmology, it's not just about observing what exists, right? It's not just about tracking time or space or matter. Well, look at these stars, that's cool. But it raises questions like this, right? Like, why does math work?
Yes.
Perhaps the most foundational cosmological question, Why is there something and not nothing?
And this is why I brought up Leibniz, because this is his famous question, and it's the often called the contingency argument, which is to say, why is there something rather than nothing? It seems like that question sort of cries out for an explanation, because if you think about it, it doesn't seem like there has to be a universe. In fact, cosmologists will often posit different ways that the universe could have been. Sometimes they're like, well, maybe it's made out of quarks, maybe it's made out of strings, right? They'll think of alternate versions of the way that the universe might have been, which in itself implies that the universe didn't have to be, at least have to be the way that it is. And so this more fundamental question of why is there something rather than nothing is one of the deepest unexplained mysteries, not just in cosmology, but really I think in life. And it's interesting because cosmologists spend all their time talking about the universe and using things like mathematics to do that. But I think maybe we're all believers here, our question sort of goes a little bit further, a little bit deeper, in asking the question, okay, we can all agree it's cool, like you were saying, Garrett, space is cool, but why is there space to begin with? Yeah.
Why is there space, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you all, because this is a very important question in cosmology, and it's one that I think a lot of people take for granted, but maybe they shouldn't. Do you think the universe had a starting point? And what I mean by the universe is what Caleb said: matter, space, time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What do you
So-
think? I have thoughts.
I'll just be honest. It's hard for me. I don't know. And this might be because I struggle with, I have just been a believer my whole life. And so my whole life is built on God. It's hard for me to separate. It's hard for me to think philosophically about, well, duh, like he created. It's hard for me to think questions like this.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense
it's hard.
at all?
It's hard for you to separate the idea of creation that you sort of take as a given, and
Yeah. To like think deeper about like why do we even have a universe? It's like, well, I know why we have a universe. I don't know.
yeah.
That's just hard for me.
What about
Garrett,
you,
I don't
Garrett?
know. Help me out, Garrett.
The science that we have points to there being a beginning.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and yes, we're, believers and all, and we can take the first verse and say, in the beginning, God created. So, coming from that standpoint, we know, well, yeah, obviously, because the Bible starts off saying that. But even, stepping back away from that, the science that we know, everything points to there was a beginning to it all, right?
Yeah.
So at some point, there was nothing.
Mm.
And now we can look back and do, all the calculations and everything and see that's where it started. It started somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would agree with that, but there's kind of an elephant in the room here, right? Because a lot of people, a lot of Christians today, and a lot of atheists who are more naturalists, or more, they would say they're on the side of science, right? However they interpret that. A lot of people would say science and religion are at odds, right? But it seems like you just said, so obviously Christians believe the universe had a start, and all of the scientific evidence that we can see points in that direction as well. So this is something that science and religion actually kind of agree on. And at least on that broad general point, we can get into some details. But it's interesting because scientists didn't always believe that. And this is something that I think might surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, which is that the scientific consensus that Garrett is pointing towards, which is that the universe is finite.
Yeah.
That is to say, there are not an infinite number of past moments, right? There's a finite number of past moments in the universe. It's a lot of moments, but it's finite. You can count them.
And Garrett, you might be able to get into this a little more given your physics background, but just for our listeners, I think one of the ways we can determine that is like the rate of expansion of the universe.
Yeah.
Yes. The universe is expanding and it's accelerating.
Yes.
So if everything started, and we're kind of getting into a big bang now at this point, but everything, there was a point where there was nothing, and then we had everything, right? And the universe is expanding faster,
Mm.
right? So it's not, usually if, when something, like if I throw something up in the air,
Right.
right, it's going to slow down
Right.
as it gets higher.
Right.
Right.
It'll decelerate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. But from this, it's saying that the universe is expanding faster.
Right.
So
Never
it's not
slowed.
slowing down, which is what you would kind of expect.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So it's like somebody still has their foot on the gas, and we're just going. And not only like, okay, now these are not the right numbers, but it's like, okay, well, yesterday we were expanding at 100 miles an hour. Now we're doing 110 miles an hour. Tomorrow we might do 120. Like that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Because
basically.
there's a, people think that there's a big bang, and at some point there's going to be a big crunch.
That's
Right.
right.
Where that means everything, it expands out, and then everything is just going to fall back in.
Yeah.
And for that, if that was really going to happen, then we would see the universe expanding at a slower and slower and slower rate.
Mhm.
But we don't see that.
Yeah.
Right.
The
Interesting.
interesting thing about the expansion of the universe is the point I was going to make a moment ago, which is that what Jeremy says is true about the fact that this has not always been the consensus. The idea that there was a beginning has not always. In fact, for most of human history, the assumption was that the universe was past eternal.
Yes.
And this was the scientific consensus, was that the universe is past eternal.
Mm.
It just is. It just always has been. And so
What are the arguments for that? Like, how would you explain that it was past eternal?
I think for some people in the ancient world, right? So
Mhm.
if we talk about it from a pre-scientific
Yeah.
point of view, because this was the assumption of the ancients as well,
Yes.
and then it was the assumption of scientists until the 20th century.
Yes.
The early part of the 20th century, when Big Bang cosmology became a thing. The I think part of it has to do with some of these philosophical concepts that are difficult for people to grasp, like the idea of nothingness
Mhm.
Yeah.
is very hard. I mean, you guys tell me. For me, it's very hard to wrap your head around the concept of nothing.
So if
And
I say,
God existing in the nothing. That's really hard to grasp.
well, like if I say think of nothing, and then you're probably going to think like
You're still
some
thinking of
kind
something.
of some kind of very dark whatever,
Yeah,
maybe
a black space.
you're
Yeah.
still thinking of something.
You're thinking of
Yeah,
space,
exactly.
like empty space. But remember,
Yeah.
when we're talking about the universe, we're including space as
Mhm.
part of it, right? So we're when we say nothing, what we're really talking about is not anything.
Yeah.
Right. Not space, not time, not matter. And if that's the case, that's a really difficult thing for people to grasp. And so
Yeah. I feel it.
people, I think, intuitively in the ancient world kind of thought, well, it's so hard to even conceive of a reality where there isn't. It's almost contradictory to say a reality that has nothing,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
reality is that exists. And so I think that people just sort of intuitively assume that there is something called necessity, right? Necessity is this claim that it has to be, right? There just has to be something in
Mhm.
existence. Well, and then you ask, well, what's the candidate for what is the necessary thing that has to be? And most people would say, well, everything around us, like the cosmos, it's here. It's been here as long as we've can have been observing it, right? And so they just kind of, the default position was it's just always been here.
Right.
Okay.
And this is kind of what the scientific consensus was until something really radical happened in the early part of the 20th century,
Yes.
which is that you have, and I'm not going to get into we've probably talked about it on other podcasts at some point, but there's this thing called the redshift.
Yes.
And there's this, it's basically the observation that Garrett was describing a moment ago, which is that we have reason, because of the way that light operated in our telescopes, we were able to say, wait a second, the galaxies that we're looking at and the stars that we're looking at through our telescopes are moving away from us.
Yeah.
And they're moving it away from us in ways that you wouldn't expect. But it's a rapid sort of thing. And basically the idea, this is like cosmology for dummies, okay, the way I'm describing this.
I need this. Yeah.
So
Call
it's
me out.
it's much more complex than what I'm describing, but the idea here is basically like, okay, so if we can observe and calculate the expansion and the rate of expansion, including its acceleration,
Right.
then
Calculus.
if we do if we do the math backwards and say, okay, if we sort of metaphorically rewind the tape of that expansion, what do you get? Well, what you find when you do that calculation is that you rewind it to where the expanding universe is closer and closer and closer and closer until it gets to a point that physicists call a singularity, which is basically it's so compact it's not something you can measure anymore.
Right.
It's to the point to where the math actually breaks down when you get to this point. Which is why physicists say, well, it actually gets to the point where we can't measure it mathematically or any other way because it's not anything there to measure.
So is this where the Big Bang comes from?
This is where the
Yep.
Big Bang.
Okay.
The Big Bang is the idea is what Garrett was describing is there is this point in the finite past, right? It's not forever ago. It was a specific number of years ago, where there wasn't anything, and then there was.
So, but this is a problem, right? Because, I mean, if you're a Christian, then I know a lot of Christians have problems saying, like, I believe in the Big Bang or endorsing the Big Bang, cosmology. And I'd kind of like to talk about why that is. Because, like, based on what Caleb just described, I don't think there's anything in the Bible that contradicts that or says that, there wasn't a definite beginning. I mean, maybe we would argue about, or some people would argue about, like, how many years in the past that is exactly right. But the general principle, there was a starting point, and then everything has kind of been proceeding from there, is something I can totally get behind as a Christian. And in fact, when the Big Bang was first proposed, it was viewed by atheists as very threatening to their worldview.
It still is.
Yeah, because and you'll see people with all kinds of theoretical physics theories, not really based in any actual scientific observations,
Right.
but to try to square that circle where they say, well, maybe there's multiverses, and then there was time travel from like the future that created us in the past, and it becomes like a Marvel movie with things, someone being their own grandfather.
Some very
or whatever.
creative ways to avoid what we're describing.
Yeah. But the easiest explanation is no, there just was a beginning that the physical stuff started. As a Christian, I can totally get behind that. Why is it that Christians then are kind of like, they hear the word Big Bang and a lot of us go,
I think there's like I don't know. I just feel like there's a stigma around especially like in our generation growing up around like science and Christianity. Like you don't mix the two. Scientists are dummies, dinosaurs aren't real, all of that.
Let's hope
I
that's not
can't
true.
speak to like why that is, but I mean there's just definitely like a divide where because I feel like even growing up I was skeptical to science because of, and I don't know, I can't like pinpoint like any kind of teaching or anything that I had as a child, but there was just always like an underlying like, no, the Bible and then science, where it's like, no, they can coexist, and
So,
I don't know.
Garrett, you studied physics, right?
Yes.
Did you turn your back on God?
No. And it, in fact, did the opposite.
Awesome.
So the Big Bang and evolution get so closely tied together that when people hear Big Bang, they immediately jump to evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And those are two very different things.
Yeah.
Right. And we're us sitting here, we don't think we evolved from monkeys.
Well,
right? But you have we had a beginning.
The question about evolution is, and even the way you phrase that too, about the from monkeys thing, right? Is I think you're tapping on the correct problem here, which is that some of that assumed tension between science and religion really is a sociological thing more than it is a theological thing.
I think people are scared that science is going to disprove their religion.
Well, the very specific example I was going to use is that the reason it's a sociological thing is because historically there was this thing called the Scopes trial.
Right up the road.
Yeah, exactly. In the state we're here based out of Tennessee, and this was a time in history. It's really too complex to get into the weeds on it in this single podcast, but I'll just frame it this way, and then maybe we can talk about it more in the future. But there was a time where Darwinian evolution, and I want to draw a distinction between evolution simpliciter, which is the claim that there's been a process of change through organisms, which is one claim, and then there's another claim that attaches some beliefs called Darwinian evolution, which assumes that it's an unguided process. Right? Those are two different claims. Right? One you might have problems with it on a scientific level, but it doesn't really say anything about the theology, whereas the other one actually makes a claim that excludes God.
Yes.
And when the Scopes trial was happening, there were lots of people on the scientific side or the naturalistic side who wanted to make that stronger claim that we were excluding the possibility of the creator having input into the process of biological life. And so what you get, sociologically speaking, is what I would argue is almost an overcorrection from believers.
Yes.
The defensiveness to say you can't cut God out, like you were saying. You can't cut God out of the equation. And so ever since then, particularly in the United States, this isn't really the case as much in certain parts of Europe, but particularly in the United States, there is this almost subconscious resistance.
We're good at overcorrecting in the United States
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
What happened is that, I mean, Christian Smith, he's a sociologist, does fantastic, really interesting work. He has a book all about this in various different disciplines called The Secular Revolution. His argument there is basically, and it applies to the scope stuff, Darwinism and science in particular, is that the atheist and naturalist use this. They made this a wedge issue as part of a sociological bid to expand influence and power over certain institutions. And they said, listen, you can't believe in religion and science. We're on the side of science. And so they created this wedge issue. What happened is that unfortunately a lot of Christians played into that, and they said, okay, you want to fight us? Bet. We'll fight you. We're going to win. And so they just accepted the terms of this division. When in reality, I think a lot of the most interesting stuff on this issue from Christian theologians and philosophers and scholars is questioning that basic premise.
Yeah.
That the naturalist, especially in the late 19th, early 20th century, said that there is a fight here. And it's saying, well, why do we have to fight? Yeah, I mean, we disagree on certain particular things. But there's no reason to think that we have to, we have to fight and everything falls neatly into one of two camps. And there's, this part controls this story and this part controls this story. And these facts are ours and these, interpretations are ours. And that's just not a good way of coming to terms with the world. But it does serve what Caleb was saying, the sociological divide, whereby different sociological groups, in this case, Christians, fundamentalist Christians mainly, and naturalist scientists compete for power.
And so, what I think Jeremy's describing there is the fact that there is a divide. I'm not trying to dismiss the idea that there is some kind of tension here, but I think that people have misidentified what the tension is. Yes. The tension is not between science and religion. The tension is between religion or faith and naturalism.
Yes.
Right? That's the actual dividing point, because naturalism excludes faith or excludes a religious explanation. And so science is really not interested in questions of ontology. It's really interested in describing what we already have. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really give us any insight in terms of origin. This is why it's such a tragedy that the sociological fallout from the Scopes trial has persisted for so long, is because evolution on its own, whether you believe it in or not, that's a sort of a question that you can kind of litigate on your own, follow the evidence where you think it leads. But whether you believe it or not, it doesn't actually answer the question about the source of life. It might, if you believe it, describe the processes of life, but it doesn't actually describe anything in terms of its ultimate foundation and origin.
Which is, how did that process get started?
Yeah.
Why something rather than nothing? And we come back to this question again.
That's right. Yeah, because it doesn't. You can't even start on the biological level. You have to go back further.
Yeah.
Which is the area that Garrett's been interested in, which is physics.
And we can disagree about the process.
Yes.
Right? We can disagree about whether evolution did or did not happen. But what we can't avoid is that fundamental question: why something rather than nothing? And then how we describe or understand the process that proceeds from that is a secondary issue,
That's
I think,
right. Yeah.
compared to that basic foundational question.
Yeah.
Well, so then let's go back, because that's kind of what Garrett had talked about, is that they are two very distinct things. So
Right.
putting evolution aside, let's hang out with the Big Bang for a little bit.
Okay.
And I'll just pose the question that everyone asks: is how can something come from nothing? And how can God exist in the nothing if there isn't anything?
Okay.
How
Those
can
are
he?
two distinct questions, but good
Yeah,
questions. Yeah.
But that's a big question that people wrestle with.
Yeah.
And it's just hard. It's hard for me to wrap my head around. So
Yeah.
who wants to answer my question?
Yeah. Garrett, do you want to go first, or you want me to ramble first?
Well, what comes to my mind first is some of the laws that the universe follows, right? So the first one that comes to mind is law of conservation of mass and law of conservation of energy, right? So law of conservation of mass just means that matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can only take another form, right? So if the laws that the universe follows is matter cannot be created or destroyed, we're here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then, okay, how? Because our universe follows this law, but by being here, we break the law, right? So then, for us to be here, every law has to have a lawgiver,
Yeah.
right? And every somebody has to write that law, right? So our universe follows this law, so somebody outside of it has to be able to step in.
What I hear
Right.
what I hear you saying is that the laws of physics that we currently observe and have very good reason to accept can't explain how the laws of physics came to be.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense, because that would be kind of a circular thing anyway, right? You can't explain the law by the law. And so what you very clearly, I think, articulated there is that in order to make sense of this universe that has this set of rational laws, which in of itself I think is kind of a mystery. Why shouldn't we expect that the universe, I mean, beyond the question of why is there something rather than nothing, why is it so orderly? Right? Why are there laws?
Why does it work?
that
Why
govern? Yeah. Why can we understand it? I mean, I know it's cliche to quote Einstein, but actually in this field it's relevant because this was his field. He says, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it can be comprehended, right? Which I think is a really profound insight, which is to say, like, this is strange. It cries out for explanation. And I think what Garrett is sort of pointing towards is, look, if we have these laws that can't explain themselves, then you sort of by definition need outside input, right? If the system doesn't give you an explanation for its existence, then there must be something outside the system that provides the explanation.
We need, if the laws of physics don't apply, can't explain it, then we need something not subject to the laws of physics, right?
That's right.
And I'm sure our listeners can figure out where we're going with that, because what is not subject to the laws of physics? Well, the spiritual, the supernatural,
the metaphysical.
the metaphysical.
There's a reason why we use that term, right? Something beyond physical. That's what it means.
And our skeptical listeners might listen to that and say, well, okay, isn't that just kind of a cop-out, right? Like, doesn't that seem like just a argument from ignorance, right? Like, we can't explain it, so we must assume it's something beyond our explanation. Not really, because this is actually rooted, and maybe we should talk about Kalam, which is the cosmological argument, which says that actually, logically, based on what we know of the physical universe, having a start, but that start can't be caused by anything physical, it is logically necessary to accept that there is some kind of cause beyond the physical universe. So maybe, I mean, y'all might want to say how that works. That's just kind of the Cliff's Notes version of that cosmological argument. It's a lot more complex.
Yeah.
But this is an argument that still to this day has never been successfully challenged.
I have a lot to say on this. There's actually, I kind of want to run two arguments. Both of
Okay.
them are cosmological, one of which we've already mentioned, beyond the Kalam. But I risk ranting for a moment. So
Buckle up,
We're prepared.
Garrett.
We're prepared.
Buckle up. I will say though, I thought that before you just go on your rant, I thought that I was in like company here, but I've just come to know that I am amongst three nerds, and I do feel
Oh.
left out because Garrett is way
Uh-huh.
smarter
So it's
than I am.
it's not the cool couch.
I am overtaken.
I'll move over there with y'all here in a second.
Just get over there. All right, go for your rant, I guess.
So at any point, please interrupt me.
You know
if
I
you
will.
have a comment or a question or anything, because I will just keep going.
Or
But
just tell you to shut up. Go ahead.
there are two arguments here. One of which we've already mentioned, right? I mean, when Jeremy mentions this question, the Leibnizian question, we'll call it, of why is there something rather than nothing? Well, Leibniz actually formalized this into an argument,
Yes, he did.
right? A philosophical, because as I mentioned, he's a mathematician and a philosopher. And so he makes this argument, and the bare bones version of it basically is everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. And then he has further premises to say, look, if the universe has an explanation for its existence, that explanation is an external cause, right? And that explanation is God.
Mhm.
And so basically it goes back to that thing that I was talking about earlier about how, people sort of intuitively know that things that exist
Mhm.
sort of require an explanation, right? Like your existence or your existence.
Right.
There is an explanation, right? It may not go all the way back, but I can give some explanation, right? Your parents got married, right?
There
And
was
had
love.
love, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are explanations for things that exist, right? And so there are really only two options on the table here. You can either say it exists because there's an external explanation, like in the case of your existence, right? I can give an external explanation for you, or something about its own nature is necessary,
Mhm.
like it has to be.
Okay.
So either the explanation comes from within and it's necessary, it
Right.
can't be contingent, or it comes from somewhere external, right? An example of a necessary thing would be
Yes,
like
please.
2 + 2 = 4 is a necessary truth.
Right.
Which means that the explanation for why 2 + 2 = 4 it is actually built in, which is to say it's not an external thing that makes that true. It just necessarily is true. It has to be. It can't be another way,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
Now apply that to the universe, and you say, well, we can explain the universe in two ways. We can say either it's necessary, which is what the ancient people and all scientists did up until the 20th century, said, look, we can say it's just necessary like 2 + 2 = 4. There's no external explanation. It just has to be this way. Or the other option is there's an external cause.
Yes. But what do we know from observations from astronomy and from our good, applying those observations and
Microwave
with
background
physical laws?
radiation. Yeah.
We know that the universe has a beginning, and therefore it
It
cannot be
necessary.
the
the
necessary.
necessary
Okay. I'm
thing,
with
right?
you now. I'm
Right.
here.
And
So,
so
it has to have
an external cause,
Okay.
right? And so then what Jeremy was doing a moment ago where he's like, look, there are certain criteria that the external cause has to have,
Mm-hmm.
right? First of all, this should be an obvious one. It can't be physical.
Because
Has
remember,
to sit outside of.
everything
yeah.
physical has to have an external
That's the
cause.
thing that we're trying to explain is the
Right.
physical stuff, right?
Right.
So it can't be a physical thing.
And we're throwing time and space into
That's right.
that
Time,
bucket.
space, and matter is what I mean when I say physical. So it can't be any of those things. So it has to be something something not bound by time in the same way, at the very least, Whether you think it's temporal or not is sort of a different question. Go watch our episode on time.
Ooh, that's a big one. Yeah.
But
Good luck.
regardless, it can't be subject to time in the same way that we are.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way. That's maybe the safest way of saying it. It can't be subject to time. It can't be spatially limited. And it can't be material. Right? Because those are the three things we're trying to explain. And if that's the case, what fits that criteria? Well, there are philosophers who, the defender of the kalam, which we'll get to here in just a moment, which is another version of this argument, will point to the fact that there really are only a couple of things in reality that match that description. One would be I've already made reference to it, which is numbers, right?
Yeah.
Mathematical, right? Truths.
There are people who believe that math determines, controls, is the foundation of the universe.
Sure. The problem with this,
Interesting.
there is a problem, which is that while math, we already talked about the unreasonable applicability of mathematics, about how it describes the universe in amazing detail. Numbers and all, I don't know of any philosophers that don't say what I'm about to say, which is that numbers are causally effete, which means they don't have causal powers.
These numbers by themselves don't make anything happen.
They
Appreciate you.
don't have any effect on anything.
Right.
They might describe something. You can use them to describe something, but they don't affect anything. They don't cause anything, and they don't relate to anything.
So looking at your wallet and seeing a $20 bill and saying $20 times 5 is $100, and repeating that over and over as a mantra won't give you $100. That might tie into a potential future episode on New Age thought that we might do.
Yeah, positive confession.
But that's what we mean, right? Is that you can know the mathematical formulas, you can chant them, you can repeat them,
Manifest.
you can recognize them. They are true, whether mathematical truths are true, whether you believe them or not. But they don't make anything happen.
They don't have any causal power, is the term that most of the time they'll use, that philosophers will use. So it can't really be numbers. Numbers can't cause anything. They might describe things that are, but they don't cause anything. So it can't be that. The other thing that matches this thing that's not subject to time, not subject to space or matter, would be minds. Right, your mind.
Yeah.
Yep. It's not brains.
Not brains.
Brains are physical.
Physical, yeah.
Right. Yep. But your mind, which is not the same thing. I mean, that's a whole nother episode. But you can pretty confidently demonstrate that your mind is not identical to your brain. So it's not a physical thing. It's not made of matter. It may interact with matter in your brain, but it's not made of matter. And it is. It's not necessarily bound by time. Maybe it works in time, but it's not necessarily bound by that either. So, and it's not spatially located. Right? How much space does your mind take up? Well, it doesn't take up any space, right? Especially true for Courtney.
Oh gosh.
Got me. I'm just thinking like we're getting really deep here. My mind is trailing. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry for that.
Gracious.
That was rude.
Anyway, this is a candidate here, right? And here's why it's a candidate, because unlike numbers, minds do cause things, right? Yeah, I'm sure what you were just thinking was not very kind to me.
It never is. Go on.
So I can think and cause my hand to move, right? I can. There's a whole variety of things. I can think and speak, right?
Yeah.
I can cause things to occur and interact with things by means of my mind. So now we have a candidate.
Maybe.
Yeah. And so
because in that example, I mean, all the minds that we're personally familiar with can only cause things to happen by acting on physical things that exist. So we can't say just a mind.
No.
Right? There are people who say like the universe has a mind, like there's a consciousness to the universe, right? But that's just having a mind, I don't think is quite enough. I'm not sure where the philosophers stand on that.
Yeah, I think, well, part of the intuition here, or maybe part of the problem is that all the minds that we're acquainted with are embodied,
Yeah.
right? But I guess the question that I would want to ask, since we're sort of swimming in the waters of necessity and contingency. Remember, contingency just means it doesn't have to be, right? Necessity means it has to be this way. I want to ask the question of, well, is it necessarily true that a mind has to be embodied?
No.
The answer is no. I think pretty self-evidently. I can conceive of my mind existing apart from my body. I can even conceive of my mind being in another body, right? Now I can't demonstrate that, but it seems at least logically consistent, right? There's no rule that says in terms of philosophy that says that can't be the case.
This is turning into a Black Mirror episode.
It is. It really is.
Yeah, it really is, because this is the kind, when we get to the most fundamental questions, the kind of questions that cosmology force us to ask. These are the kind of waters you have to wade into. So the point that I'm making here with the mind thing is that, as Jeremy mentioned, we have this acquaintance with minds that interact with physical things.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that their causal powers can be causal powers over the physical,
Okay.
and there's no philosophical reason to think that minds have to be embodied. So now we're getting closer to this idea that the explanation of the physical could be something mind-like. Since minds can have power over physical things,
Mm-hmm.
and minds are not bound by those physical things. So that's the first argument. We call that the contingency argument. That's the one that Leibniz is famous for.
Are we crawling towards God being a giant mind?
Well,
something like that.
it's funny you say that.
Yeah.
You're trying to segue us through your rant is what
Yeah.
I'm doing.
Well, the rant's not over.
We're halfway
Because-
there.
Yeah, and here we are.
If you thought we were about to land this plane,
We just hit
Landed already.
we're just taking it off.
the super tanker that refuels us in the sky has just pulled up.
Yeah. Because
Get ready.
there's another version of the argument that I just made. Now we don't have to spend as much time on it because we've
It's
already
okay.
fleshed it out, which is that the argument from contingency, which
Okay.
is a necessity or contingency. The other cosmological argument is the Kalam cosmological argument.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's very simple.
Very,
Actually,
very aware of what this is.
Yeah.
but-
it has fewer steps than the argument that I just made, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's really easy to remember. It's everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Okay.
Premise 2, the universe began to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause.
Right.
Will you repeat that again?
Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, it's very similar to the argument that we just made, except instead of appealing to explanations, we're appealing to causes, right? And instead of asking the question of why there is something rather than nothing, we're asking why was there a beginning?
Yes.
And so this relates to the Big Bang cosmology that Garrett was talking about earlier, because it actually sort of starts with that.
Mhm.
It says, look, here's something we know about reality. Well, let me put it this way. It's going to leverage the Big Bang thing, because it says here is a philosophical art. Because notice the argument that I just said, everything that begins to exist has a cause, universe began to exist. The only claim, it doesn't actually make any scientific claims. The only claim it makes is in the second premise. It says the universe began to exist. We won't do it because I can see y'all's eyes glaze over when I go on these rants, but you can make philosophical arguments for the finitude of the universe. You don't even have to appeal to science to do that. You can make arguments saying that an actual infinite number of past moments is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have an actual infinity of something,
Yeah.
because you'll never reach it, right? And so we would never get to the present moment. There's lots of really good arguments to say that this is the case. But the good news for us is, as scientists, as people who are not opposed to science, right, is that Big Bang cosmology tells us that the universe began to exist. And if it did, and we accept premise 1, then the conclusion that the universe has a cause necessarily follows.
Yes.
Um,
And because it has a cause, someone had to cause it.
Yes.
some,
That's what we're getting?
Yes, and and we need to remember what we
Or
mean by the
something had to cause
something,
it.
yeah.
remember what we mean by the universe, matter, space, time. Anything we can fit into those buckets, right? So if all of that had a cause, then we can take it a step further and say, well, something that doesn't fit into those buckets had to have caused it.
Mhm.
Now, but it's interesting though, because some of our listeners probably caught this. Some of you are probably already familiar with this argument, Kalam argument. Why is it called the Kalam cosmological argument? Well, because it was developed by one Islamic philosopher in particular in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, Al-Ghazali is the
Mhm.
one. He's the one I'm aware of. There may have been others who contributed to
Yep.
the argument, but he's really the sort of the pioneer
Yeah.
of the argument.
So kalam is an Arabic word. And why do I bring this up? It's because of the thing that Caleb mentioned a second ago about how this is a very general argument, right? This is not rooted in any kind of conception of God or the divine on the front end. This is
Right.
simply an argument based on a logical syllogism, right?
Yeah.
Just rules of logic. And so, it's interesting that this is such a broadly applicable argument that, it was nurtured and fostered in medieval Islamic philosophy.
Mhm.
And then it was resurrected in the 20th century by a Christian philosopher named William Lane Craig,
Yeah.
whom I'm sure a lot of our audience has
Brilliant.
heard of.
Mhm.
And he's championed this. And so that may give some people pause, right? It's like, why are Christians so interested in this Islamic philosophical point?
Because it's a good argument.
Because it's good and it doesn't require and it doesn't appeal to anything intrinsic in Islamic theology or
That's
the
right.
Quran. Doesn't appeal, and in its basic form, it doesn't appeal to anything present in the Christian Bible or Christian theology. We're just on the level of general logic and necessity here.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the implication of the argument gets you to where what you were describing, Courtney, which is something is responsible for bringing the universe about. And as Jeremy just described, it can't be something that fits into one of the buckets of time, space, and matter. And the only two things that that anyone that I'm aware of has ever suggested that doesn't fit those categories are numbers and minds. And so if it's not numbers because they don't cause anything, then it has to be a mind.
Yep.
Um,
And then we can go, from the revealed truths of Scripture and from, work by other Christian philosophers, and we can flesh out what we mean by mind,
yeah.
right? And we can say that, it has to have certain characteristics. It has to have causal power, a
Yeah.
certain degree of what we would call omnipotence, et cetera, et cetera. And
That's
we
right.
can start saying, well, this mind has to have certain attributes that basically lead us to think, well, this has to be God. But there's some arguments there. We're probably not going to get into that, but that's the road that you can go down once you lay the foundation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The basic idea is, while our minds maybe serve as an analogy because we have certain causal powers, I don't think anyone would say that like Garrett's mind couldn't cause the universe to exist, right? Because it's finite, it's limited.
He doesn't
So-
have the Infinity Stones.
So,
so,
yeah,
right.
exactly. Unfortunately. But yeah, whatever mind this is would have to be a mind of infinite power. To bring about something as vast and complex as the universe. And so, yeah, those are the kind of traits that you would layer on. You'd make further arguments to say, well, what would it have to be like? And then when you finish doing this, what you're going to find is that it looks suspiciously like God.
Suspiciously,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
rant over.
Yeah.
Rant
Us
over.
as people, we want to understand everything, which is good, and I think God also wants us to understand, right?
Yeah.
Because all throughout the Bible, and kind of going back to where we started, all throughout the Bible, it constantly says, "Look up at the stars."
Yeah.
Right. He's
Mhm.
constantly, all the time, look up at the stars. Look up at the stars. So I think there's something in us that kind of says, look up, because
Yeah.
it's cool, and there's something that draws me to it.
Yeah.
Right. And we said earlier, we can't, if you think about nothing, we can't do that, right? So we can't understand nothing at all. So that means something outside of everything we know has to have caused everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for all, space, time, matter, like everything that we're talking about, all three of those things have to come into existence all at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? You have to get all three of them all at once.
Yeah.
Because if you have space and time but no matter,
What are we talking
then
about?
what's
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
If you have time and matter but no space, where do you
Yeah, that's a
put
very
the
strange
matter,
thing. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you have space and matter, when do you put it, right? So you
Yeah.
have to have all three of these things all at the same
Yes.
time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when you read that first verse of the Bible, you get all three of those things
Yeah.
that come into existence all at the same time.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
beginning, so we have time.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, God created the heavens, so there's space, and the earth, matter.
Matter.
Right? So we get all three of those things that come into existence all at the same time.
Yeah.
But then, people make the arguments, because eventually you get to a point where you can't really understand it, because we want to understand, and we want a physical explanation for it, right? Because everything we know is physical,
Yeah.
right? That's the only thing we can understand. That's what we can understand,
Yeah.
right? So nothing is not. We can't understand that. We can't understand infinity, right? We can't understand eternity, right? Because that to us in our brains, we live in a physical world and physical universe where that's not a it's not a
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
So we have to somehow, how do we figure that out?
Yeah.
And there's something outside of it. And I've heard the argument, because people want to, how can I, people want that physical answer, but God isn't. It's not physical. But if I can understand God in my brain, that's not a God worth worshiping.
Yeah.
Right?
I think,
Yeah.
That's not, because if I can understand everything about him and how he works and all, that's not worth worshiping at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's a great point, and I think it kind of gets us back to the question we started with. It's like, why are we so interested in space? Why are we so interested in these things that seem so far beyond our own experience? It's because, when we bump up against these questions, it really we get to marvel at how immense and vast and interesting creation is. But we're also reminded simultaneously how limited we are.
Mm-hmm.
And going into cosmology, I think if we do it the right way and we actually pay attention to what's true and real, reminds us of our own limitations and causes us to look beyond ourselves, right? And I think, and hopefully if you're convinced by this conversation that we've had, that means also looking to God and understanding that, a proper understanding of cosmology admits what is true and real in a physical sense, and also pushes us beyond that, pushes us beyond our narrow boundaries, right? Like what you were saying, Garrett, and leads us to something beyond ourselves. There's a sense of wonder there. There's a sense of fascination.
Yeah, I think that's just the beauty of creation is we were meant to walk with God and we'll never come to the end of knowing all that he is. And if he just gave us, I think a lot of people ask, and even just thinking about, things in scripture, like why doesn't God just tell it? Like, why doesn't he just tell us things, or why doesn't he just show us things? And it's like, that's the beauty of getting to know him. I have a lifetime that I'll never fully come to get to know him, and then I get to spend eternity with him, still learning about him, because he is just so great. And I
Yeah.
just think that's so beautiful. I don't
Yeah.
know.
It certainly is. There's a couple of really profound philosophical and theological things that I think that Garrett was sort of gesturing towards, which is that you were saying that there's because we have this lack of conception of nothingness, right? With this intuition that says that we can't even really understand the idea. And this goes back to the question you were asking about how can God exist in the nothingness. The answer is that he doesn't. And this is why, because the intuition that we have that nothingness, true nothingness, where there isn't anything, is not actually possible. And the mistake that that humans have made in the pre-scientific era and in the scientific era up until the 20th century was they baked in the idea of necessity, that something has to be, but the mistake they made was that they put it in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Right? Which is to say that they assumed that the thing that was necessary was the universe. And it's not. And we figured that out in the 20th century, which is that it's actually contingent because it hasn't always been. But there is something that is necessary that has to be. Of course, I'm thinking of the language in Exodus chapter 3 when God reveals himself to Moses and says, I am that I am. Right? Now that's a very deep utterance that God gives there. And so it's very multifaceted. But part of it, at least a piece of it, I think, is this idea, this heavyweight idea of his own existence, which is that he cannot fail to be. He is. And that is to say, philosophers would say he is a necessary being. And so the reason why we can't conceive of a reality that's a contradiction terms, really, where there is not anything, is because there is no possible world. There is no possible reality where there is not anything, because God is, and he is necessarily. And so while the created cosmos is contingent, he is not.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I think that's sort of baked into our conception of the way things are, because that is the way that things are.
Yeah.
That's part of the other element I think that you were gesturing towards, which is a deep philosophical, a deep theological point that all three of you guys have sort of been echoing, which is the heavens declare the glory of God, right?
Yeah.
It is in some ways, I almost want to put it in the realm. What do you think, Jeremy, of artistry?
Yeah.
Like it's something like the arts, in that.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say God is sort of, he is revealing himself in the vastness of the cosmos, and the awe-inspiring, the wonder kind of thing that it provokes, it's almost like a canvas that he's painting on, and it and even it only gives us a glimpse of his infinite worth. Yeah,
I'd say that's true. And there's especially with Romanticism, in the 18th and 19th centuries, there was the concept of the sublime, which is kind of like what we're talking about here, although different. But basically, the idea of the sublime this was when people, especially in Europe, artists, philosophers, were thinking about this sense of wonder that we get when we look at things like massive mountains or crazy thunderstorms or stuff like that. And it's this sense of like taking us out beyond ourselves, beyond conceptions, beyond categories and stuff. And of course, it kind of had a secular bent. Eventually, within Romanticism, there were forerunners of it that kind of equated it with like a spiritual kind of experience in Christian teaching, and how, observing nature at its most extreme pointed us beyond our everyday physical categories and could lead us to God. That's kind of, different historical moment, but that's kind of the thing we're talking about here. So yeah, and that idea was a big thing in art, right? The sublime in art and romantic art. And in many ways, we are the heirs of Romanticism, for better or for worse, right? We still have ideas from Romanticism, like, the suffering artist that creates these amazing works, and this idea that chaos and threat and immense challenges, difficulties, the immensity of the natural world over against the smallness of our own existence can be the subject of great art. We still have those ideas. And I think in a certain way, that's one of the ways to understand what you're talking about. So yeah, Caleb, I would agree with you. There is a sense in which this does have something to do with art. And I don't know that I don't think that's entirely historically contingent. Because if you ask to get back to our question, why is there something rather than nothing? If you ask that in Christian terms, Christians don't believe that God had to create the universe.
Right. That's right.
The best explanation that I've heard, and I think really the only explanation, is the mystery of divine love. And that through something that we can't conceive, for some reason, it delighted God
He
to
wanted
make
to.
the universe. And that is something that I think that if you accept that, if you meditate on that, that's something immensely powerful. because it says, over against, the whatever trials or whatever the world looks like physically, we have to remember this all started because God loved us, right? But because more fundamentally, God himself is love.
Mm.
And he wanted an us to love, even if we can't entirely, explain that. And he doesn't need us, but he chose for us to exist. And that is something that when we talk about cosmology, that I think is extremely powerful and motivating.
Yeah.
So, in other words, maybe to put a little bow on what you just said, is the contingency that we get from something like Big Bang cosmology. That's really the fruit of what the Big Bang theory says, is that the universe is contingent. It didn't have to be.
Yeah.
But that, in a sense, is maybe a window into the character and nature of God, because the fact that it didn't have to be and yet it is tells us that God, in some sense, delighted in the idea of making the cosmos.
Yeah.
And what a thing! I get goosebumps thinking about that.
Yeah.
About it didn't have to be. And in some ways, the idea of it being necessary cheapens it, because it says, well, it's just almost like an obligation. But it's not an obligation. God does it of his own free will, of his own free love, and his delight. And that's why we're here.
Yeah, everything, reading the days of creation and all, at the end of every day, and it was good.
And it was good.
And it was good.
Yeah.
And it was good. And you hear, because and perspective is a very important thing, because you have arguments where it says, look up at everything. We are nothing compared to the vastness of the universe, right? I mean, we are a speck of dust compared to how massive the universe is. So God doesn't need us. He doesn't, he's fine how he is, right? He doesn't need us at all. But you have people that see that and they look up, like, look at how massive the universe is. What are we here for? There's no purpose at all, right? So you just kind of live how you want to, whatever. But my way of thinking about it is, look at how massive the universe is. The heavens sing the praises of God. And with all that, he didn't need us. But in everything that he created, he still decided, I want a Garrett. I want a Jeremy. I want a Caleb. I want a Courtney. In all of everything that he made, he still decided, I want one of you. Even though you are minuscule compared to the vastness of everything else that I made, you are the only thing I've created that can experience the true love that I have.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing else that he's created can, they can't experience and give that love back, right?
Yeah, sharing the image.
Yeah. We can, and that's, free will kind of comes into, and that's a whole other episode for y'all. But we have the choice. We can either love him or not, right? But we have that choice of, I'm going to choose to love him, right?
Yeah.
And in everything that he's created, he still decided, I want you.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Which
awesome.
is-
You might have a future as a gospel preacher there, Garrett.
Well, I'm super thankful to have you on today,
Thank
and
y'all.
I'll
It was
just
fun.
land this plane. It's been a really awesome episode, and I like that at the end of it, we were just pointed back to his goodness and his love, which I think is just, the more that you search for answers in this world, that's ultimately what you come back to, is you just experience just how much he loves us. And I think that's so beautiful. So thank you for tuning in, listeners and viewers. And we hope to catch you on social media. So follow us along, and we'll see you next time.